Okay. Hello, everyone. Let's check the sound. Do you hear me? You can type in chat if you can hear me well. Awesome. Okay, so today is lesson number 4. How many people did we have during the last lesson? Around 80. Okay, so we have 57 right now. Let's give it about, I don't know, 5 more minutes or so, and then we will start. Okay, so just to get some quick feedback on your last lesson, how did it go? What did you guys like the most? What did you remember? Um, how did it go overall? And today was great. We were discussing development life cycle, was helpful. Bug report was fun. Okay, so today we will be discussing different approaches in both development and testing within those approaches. We will be talking about Waterfall, Agile, and Scrum approaches in the development or within the development life cycle. And we will be talking about testing web applications based on the specifications and reporting bugs to JIRA. All right, I'm gonna share my screen and I'll shut off my camera. Okay, do you guys see my screen? Awesome. All right, let me turn off my camera so it doesn't cover the screen. And all right, here we go. So let's talk a little bit about different types of uh, approaches when doing development. So what do you guys remember from yesterday's lesson in regards of software development life cycle? So as you remember, it pretty much goes through stages, right? And it was came up to be back into this in the 60s and it was developing along. But this is pretty much an overall approach from the very beginning, from the start of the project to the very end, right? And everything should go through the stages. So with different approaches built within the cycle, it's pretty much the same thing. This is how you approach working on a product or building software. Waterfall approach going to be probably closer to the normal software development lifecycle. And the reason for that is that it appeared first. Um, okay. Someone asked me to turn on my camera, so let me do that. If you guys want to see me, sure, that's not a problem. If you really want to see me. Um, okay. Hopefully, it's not in the way. So when talking about software development lifecycle, there are stages, and based on that, there was developed a waterfall approach when creating software or product, and the waterfall model is a very linear, sequential design approach for certain areas of engineering design. In software development, it tends to be among the less iterative and flexible approaches as progress flows in largely one direction, downwards like a waterfall, or you can think about stairs and water going down the stairs, through the phases of conception, initiation, analysis, design, construction, testing, deployment, and maintenance. So what do you see on your screen right now? Pretty much software development lifecycle in a way, right? But those are the stages of the product development. So let's say you want to build an application and you have finances allocated for that application development, and you have amount of time and the team, you know how long it's going to take. So for the time frame and the resources you have, you stick to the plan. So first, you will be working on the requirements, and that's going to take, I don't know, maybe a month or two. Then there will be a design, also a couple months. Then going to be implementation, which is actually coding, which can take maybe, I don't know, half a year, maybe less. Then there will be testing, and the testing will be thorough. So that means something issues found, it goes back, it gets fixed, and the testing continues. But until everything is tested and works perfectly, the software is not released. The customer don't see the product till the very end when it's ready. After that comes deployment. So it hits the market, it goes to the customers, and what is left is maintenance. So if you have like a Bank of America application or any other bank application, you will occasionally see updates, some improvements, um, bug fixes, but there's no active development going on. Now, thinking about the waterfall concept, and because it appeared as the first concept in the development approach, what companies do you think will be using this, and is it being used now? It's a question to everyone. So banks, Amazon, Google, Oracle. It's hard to answer, but I'll give you some hints. So first of all, company has to have resources allocated. Also, it has to have the time frame, and this time frame has to be significant. It's a year plus to work on a product from the very beginning to the very end, and the release and everything thoroughly tested. So it's not really chasing the market, more of a like it's creating a product that may be required, but there is no a lot of competition. Otherwise, you know, there are better approaches to do that. Diana says a good point. Isn't it an older model that isn't used much anymore because it's not as effective compared to others? Uh, you are right, partially right. And people saying works for any company, not really. So waterfall approach works for companies that have a lot of time on their hands and they don't care a lot about getting product fast to the customer. So if we talk about Google and Amazon, they all started as startups, and I'm pretty sure they did not take years and years to release their product. They had a lot of competition going. They had limited finances. They had to show something to investors. Think about this waterfall approach. I don't know. Have you ever visited your local local DMV website or any sort of a government website, right? So it's pretty outdated, but it's very regulated as well. So if you think about waterfall approach, think about big companies, companies that have a lot of resources behind them, have a lot of time for development. I would say banks, corporate banks could use waterfall approach because they already have cash inflow coming from their banking activity, a government that has allocated funds for developing something. So companies that really don't have to bother too much about money and competition. Also think about healthcare industry where everything has to be thoroughly tested and has to follow certain standards like government standards, so healthcare standards, privacy standards, all that stuff. So there it is used. Believe me, waterfall is used in a lot of companies, but those are the companies that have almost infinite resources and they're not kind of chasing the market as of right now. Uh, Big corporations is a very good example. Um, I can give you a more detailed example. Let's grab Bank of America, and let's say they have team that is trading on the stock market. I don't know, like a hedge fund division. So they want to develop a secure application for all the traders to communicate with each other. They can't use Skype, they can't use Zoom, they can't use all the third-party products because it's a security issue, right? So they have to build their own on their own server. It has to be very isolated. They have a lot of money, and they give the team, bring the team together and say, well, you have about like a year to build this or something like that. Okay, and then they start working on that. When this application is released to the trading team, it's really just it's thoroughly tested, it's secure, and from that point that it's being released, it's only like maintenance, fixing small bugs. If they find something like some updates, but there's no like ongoing development, right? So USCIS, yeah. So it is used. And think about it, when you will be looking for a job, for a new job, um, you might want to go in the corporate world, and it's going to be just doing some basic functions within your job title, and they might be using the waterfall approach. It's going to be slow. You'll come to your workplace, do your like daily activity, you put a mark on the checklist, you'll go home. That's it's a possibility. There are jobs like that out there. Okay. Um, let's talk about agile approach. So, because waterfall approach came up to be back in the 80s, 90s, I don't know, 80s probably, together with the software driven life cycle kind of a thing. Um, Agile approach is an approach to software development under which requirements and solutions evolve through the collaborative effort of self-organizing and cross-functional teams and their customers or end users. It advocates adaptive planning, evolutionary development, early delivery, and continual improvement, and it encourages rapid and flexible response to change. So what do you see on this picture? How Agile is different from Waterfall, and why do you think it's shown in this way? It's like a spiral model. You can say that. Iterations, exactly. That's a perfect word to capture that. So what does it mean? Um, Instead of a year, you have a fixed amount of time to release something. Those fixed period of time is called sprints. And in agile approach, they can be up to several months, from months to 2 months. Within the sprint, there's a selected list of features that's being worked on. And at the end of the sprint, they potentially are released and they're going to the customer. So if something is available to the end user on your banking application, That means that features were deployed to production. So production is the actual software version that customers are using. And that means there was a deployment and it's in production. So at the end of every sprint, there's a selected list of things to be worked on during the sprint. And at the end of the sprint, if they are completed, they're released to the customers. Now, let's think about who could use this approach. Give me some examples. Okay, small companies. Who else? US Bank. I'm not sure. I would assume that US Bank would use Waterfall. Companies that have less time at their disposal, Instagram, Facebook, etc. Every other that is not using Waterfall. That's true. um, New businesses. Okay, I'll give you an example. There's a startup, and they want to build a web-based game, right? The CEO, and he is also an investor. He hired some people. He gave to the project, let's say, $2 million, and he said, "Well, I want something to be ready in 3 months, something that I can touch." So within those 3 months, the team have to have some sort of requirements developed and develop some sort of a product. It's not going to hit the customers yet, but at least the CEO can see it, or the top investor. So there's a concept right now. It's called MVP, and it means minimal viable product. So something that you can kind of see the concept, how it works, has some basic features. So he gave them some time to work on the product, come up with a concept or develop his concept, have some basic functionality, something he can already like pretty much play in 3 months. It doesn't mean it's going to get released to the customers, but it's something he can touch. Why it's important? Well, maybe there's competition where maybe there are other startups that trying to build a similar game. Maybe he wants to hit the market as soon as possible to start making money off the product. He wants the investment to pay as fast as he can. He doesn't want to keep on throwing in money. He wants the companies to start making something back right away, which is, I mean, it's very unlikely because we know that startups go through rounds and rounds of funding. So there's a first round of funding, and then there's a second, and there's Series A, Series B, like seed funds. So they go through those funds from year to year, but within those timeframes, they also keep on developing and delivering products. So think about it as if Instagram got their $500,000. In half a year, they build some bare functionality where you can just take a picture and upload it, but you can't press like or you can't tag a friend. And over time, they add more and more and more. Within the sprints and iterations, they add more features that customers want, or investor request, or CEO or team come up with the new features like together, like product owner. Um, and it's being built upon and upon, and it becomes more and more sophisticated. And right now, in the Instagram, there's stories, there are likes, there are like tags, there's so many different things that are like tons of filters. It's not even about filters anymore. Remember how Instagram just came to be? It was all about those cool photo filters. It's not about filters anymore. Instagram is about stories now, most likely, I think, right? Or sharing like your opinions, like a microblog with text and some pretty photos, but not about filters anymore. Definitely not. So you see how the products evolves within the agile approach, right? Is deployment and release the same? I think in the bigger context, yes, it is. But um, it really, from company to company, they can give it a different meaning. But normally, deployment means that something just was deployed or like a new build was created. Release could mean something bigger, that it was actually released to the customer, right? So you can deploy the new build, but that's going to be only used for further development. And when you're doing a release, you're definitely creating a new build, right? Or you maybe that's something that's being tested, but you're actually pushing it out to the production environment, and so the users will actually see the update and they can interact with new features. So the reply would to the question Anna is asking. So the companies with limited budget, not necessarily limited budget, but competitive companies, companies that are dependent on investor funds, companies that are flexible in their development approach. There's nothing as robust as here. This one is pretty robust. So everything is designed from the start, and then you follow the design in the waterfall approach until it's ready as it should be. In the agile approach, some features and working well with people, with customers, it can be thrown out. New feature can be added. The development is pretty flexible. I want to show you this little Google search on Agile principle. Well, we can probably go to the memorandum. And Agile is relatively new. Also, I encourage everyone to start Googling a lot. I want you to develop a habit. If you don't know something, and it's not because I'm lazy answering your questions, but that's how your workday is going to be. Instead of asking something first, just try Googling it and finding an answer yourself, and consider that now to be your lifelong habit. It's going to be your professional work deformation eventually when you start working as QA, because part of being an engineer is trying to figure out how to solve a problem. So your first desire, if you don't know something, would be do a little research. And then if you can't find an answer, you don't know how to solve something, it takes too long, then you go to your peers or your management, and then you start asking questions. But your first thing will be definitely doing a little Google research, right? Okay, so let's take a look at the manifesto. So there was a team of people that, well, several people that were tired of this waterfall approach. They wanted to develop something better, and they came up with this Agile manifesto, right? So, based on their combined experience of development software and helping others to do that, the 17 signatories of to the manifesto proclaimed that they value. So, individuals and interaction over processes and tools. So that means doesn't really matter the tools that you use um, or the processes. It's more about what people want and communicate to each other to make sure that you're picking up the best, the most effective approach. Working software over comprehensive documentation. So if in Waterfall you work on tons and tons of documentations, you make sure that everything is following the regulations. There's certain standards in certain industries. You just can't go around them because you know it's a violation of a law, like privacy things and different things, right? So, but in Agile, it's about delivering something that is actually working, and then you can kind of develop documentation along the way. Um, Customer collaboration over contract negotiation. So that means you want to talk to your end customers, your investors, to people to make products better, not just say we will do this, this, and this, and this is how much we're going to charge you for that, and you can't really change the contract, or if you do, you know, it's going to cost you extra. So responding to change over following plans. So those are the core Agile software development values. Okay. And then there are also some principles, but I leave it up to you to read them, Google them, and read them. I think it's overall interesting read. So give it some time tonight or probably tomorrow after the lesson. All right. So Agile appeared first as a flexible approach, right? And then, well, this is a quick slide where we can take a look on Waterfall versus Agile. So give me your understanding. What do you see here on this slide? What's the major differences between the Waterfall cycle and Agile cycle? Okay, good. So Agile works in iterations, adds features as time goes on. Waterfall is linear. QE covers multiple stages, small development at a time, repetition of cycles. Okay, so based on those two different approaches, uh, which one will you most likely encounter if you go and work for a big corporation? uh, Agile, Agile, both, waterfall. It's hard to say, but if you think about big corporations, especially those corporations that have to follow some US laws and regulations, let's say healthcare, most likely you will go and meet a waterfall approach towards development, or big banks. It doesn't mean that they don't have teams that work in agile. You have to understand this. Uh, the approaches are mixed a lot of times in the real world. The different teams in the company can work in different approaches. Some of the teams might be waterfall, other could be agile. But most likely going into a big corporation or a bank, you'll have something that is already set in place. Rarely see a lot of movement in terms of like improvement. As long as it works, it's fine. So waterfall um, is very, very possible thing. Okay. Do you remember that problem when people started receiving unemployment funds when the COVID thing hit, and there was issue with people getting their unemployment because the whole thing was written in a language coded in Cobalt or something like that, a language that nobody knows how to program anymore. It was like 50 years ago or something along those lines. And the programmers that they were coding in that language were like 70 years old. System was never designed to give so many unemployment checks, processing so much data, and it just kept on crashing, and that caused a lot of delays. Right? Remember that? So yeah, that's pretty much a waterfall project that was done a long time ago. Maybe there was some maintenance to some extent, but it probably was following a lot of regulations, and it was just there, and it works, and nobody cares. Okay. And nobody did stress test through that. Maybe they did, but the probably people never expected that it's going to happen. Population going to grow, and everybody going to go and ask for unemployment. Um, okay, so big corporations, wonderful. And if you think about agile, first thing that should come to your mind is a startup that trying to build a MVP and has to be competitive and needs to go through multiple rounds of receiving investment to stay alive, pretty much. Okay. And you can see a waterfall cycle here. It's linear. The whole phase is, there's, let's say, a year to complete the project. Everything is just from A to Z in one run. In Agile, you see those features, and those features have like mini cycles. So a feature will be analyzed, it will be designed, it will be developed, it will be tested, then it will be released, and then feature A is completed, they'll start working on feature B. Again, normally, Agile, is done in sprints, and sprints in Agile are about from 1 to 2 months long. Okay, so within the 2 months, the features have to be completed. Will there be a release at the end of the sprints? That is very, very likely, but different companies follow different approach. Some companies have like 2 or 3 sprints before they do like a release to production. Other companies do release to production at the end of every sprint. That can vary from startup to startup. What is sprint? Time frame? Yes, sprint is pretty much a fixed amount of time. Let's say from 2 weeks up to 2 months. It really depends on the company. What you have allocated to work on selected features. So you have a month. This month is pretty much your sprint. And within the sprint, you have to complete feature A. Okay. Agile is flexible, yes. Are there many many waterfall projects? I can say there are quite some amount of those, especially government projects or highly regulated projects or like big corporations. They have still use waterfall for certain development, yes. Stand-up meeting is only in Agile. We'll talk about stand-ups and we'll talk about what it is, okay? So think about Agile as a very, very, very beginning of other different processes of the software development. One of the most popular now is Scrum, or also called Scrum Agile. So Scrum came to be out of Agile. It grew into this specific approach. And you can do a little research and do some Googling after the class on other types of development processes, and you'll find Kanban, you'll find mixture of waterfall, you'll find like a great deal of different things. But you need to remember only 3: waterfall, Agile, and Scrum. Everything else is just for your curiosity. So out of Agile grew Scrum. Scrum is even faster and a lot more aggressive than Agile in terms of development. Normal Scrum sprint length is from 1 to 2 weeks, rarely more. And let me just read this first. So Scrum is in Agile framework of software development. It is designed for teams of 3 to 9 members, so small teams, who break their work into actions that can be completed within time box iterations called sprints. No longer than 1 month and most commonly 2 weeks. Then track progress and replan in 50 minutes time box stand-up meetings called daily scrums. Okay, so over here you see iteration of, well, you see actual sprint 1, sprint 2, sprint 3, you see feature sprints, stabilization sprint, and finally deployment, which probably is also a release. So that means that multiple features worked in different sprints, and there's some stabilization sprints. So it's all kind of jammed and mixed up, but the core point here, they have week 1 where, for QA, it's shown for QA here, and was in the sprint. There's some requirements, some test case development, and week 2, more test case development and execution while features being worked on. And week 3, more execution, verification of the work done. Then another sprint starts and some more work. And then in sprint 3, which is only 2 weeks, full regression starts. So everything is being retested, bugs being reported, things being fixed, you verify that everything's good, you run a regression again, and then there's a release. So this is like in the perfect world. A lot of companies just use 2 weeks for a sprint. At the end of 2 weeks, they try to release like some feature going out. So Scrum is a lot more aggressive. One of the things about Scrum, there's no project manager per se. There's normally one in Agile, but there is product owner and there is a Scrum Master. So Scrum Master is a person that facilitates Scrum process. It's like a not really a manager, but he helps guiding everybody along. Teams are small. There's no necessarily like manager or like he's the most important guy. No, a team is kind of combined together. Developers with QA, with art people, designers, everything like within one team. The whole team works on some feature. By the end of the 2 weeks, they report on the results. Then they grab new sprint starts, they grab some more features to work on, and the whole thing begins all over. If you don't finish within 2 weeks, what will happen? If you don't finish within 2 weeks, so first of all, it's not just one feature being worked within the sprint. Normally, team measures their time and they grab multiple things. So I have to show you this so you understand better. So right now we'll be looking at JIRA, and let's find a board that has sprint. Oh no, I don't want to create new board. Kanban. Maybe this project. Kanban. No. Let's see. Scrum. Maybe this, yeah. Let's see. Here's a Scrum board. Maybe this one. All right. So there's something called backlog in the sprint. So here's a list of tasks within the sprint. You can see them, they're being picked for sprint 2. That means, they're being worked within the sprint. But then there's also backlog that has a lot of other tasks that are not being worked in the sprint. Normally, they are prioritized in the backlog by urgency. So when the next sprint starts, team will start pulling the stories in here within the sprint from the backlog, like from the shelf on the table, right? And then when you're done with the sprint, the story is closed. It's off the table to, I don't know, to the storage. But there's still a bunch of things on the shelf, and backlog things are being added there all the time. Things, suggestions to work on, how to improve. So it's like a continuous repetitive cycle. What happens if you don't finish the story by the end of the sprint? Well, maybe you partially finish it, so it's kind of split within the story, and the story is pretty much like a feature or a task. There can be subtasks, so it can go to the next sprint and being finished, or it can be deprioritized and sent back to the backlog saying, well, we don't have resources right now to work on that. It's maybe no longer a priority. So different things can happen if story is not finished. Now, complexity of a feature worked on, or as they called stories in Scrum, is measured in Fibonacci sequence. All right, let me show you. And why they do that? Well, I don't know. Normally, it's up to 13. So they can say the complexity of the story is 1. That means, well, 1 will probably take a developer to finish a couple hours up to a day. If the complexity of the story is 2, well, maybe a day and a half. If 3, maybe up to 3 days. If 5, pretty complex, maybe 5 days or a week. If 8, maybe about a week and a half. So 8 is fairly complex. 13 is like 2 weeks. Nobody does product owner, the guy or the lady that is responsible for creating the stories in the backlog or talking with investors and asking what they want to know, what they want to have as a feature being worked on. And nobody creates stories more than 13. 13 is almost impossible. Normally it's 8. Sometimes 3 to 5, depends on the complexity. But one person in 2 weeks of work, a developer, can't take more normally than 8 points. It's measured in points, right? In Fibonacci sequence. And 8 points means about a week and a half work. If you also put in testing together with it, it's about 2 weeks. So one developer per sprint can theoretically grab 8 1-point stories, or like small features, or one big story that will be 8 points. The story's complexity is determined by the developers and the team together during the meetings before beginning of the sprint, when new stories are being added. So there's, at the beginning of the sprint, there's a sprint planning, and at the end, there's a retrospective of the sprint. So they talk what went well, what not went well. So it's like an ongoing process. Approximately 1 point per day. Somewhat, yes, you can think about it in this way. Not exactly, but 1 hour is also 1 point. But up to a day, maybe 1 to 2 points. It really depends on the company how they measure it, but that's like a rough estimate. So every story is measured in complexity, and then they assign a number in Fibonacci sequence, and one developer gets up to 8 points per sprint that they work on. Okay. Once the sprint is completed, it's closed. All the stories that are done are gone. A new sprint starts. There's sprint planning. New stories are drawn in. They're estimated how complex they are, and the new sprint starts. And it keeps on repeating itself. How do I use Google Drive to download the material? Do I need a link? And Diane provided you with the link. Thank you. Okay. Is the term story specific to your company? No, I think stories is specific to Scrum approach. Yeah. So you will hear it most likely. There is an epic. Epic is a collection of stories. So when there is a story that is, let's take a look at the Fibonacci. Let's say it's developer looks at it and says, well, this story is like 21 points. It's fairly complex. There's a lot of things that need to go in. It's not just one component. It's multiple things, multiple different components he needs to code. It's very complex. It's not a story anymore. It becomes an epic. Epic is, well, creating like, I don't know, manager's permission for your banking account. And within that epic, there will be create manager's cabinet, like more secure login, bring up the new server that is isolated from other servers. So multiple different things have to go in there. And the collection of stories under this epic is part of the like development process. Okay. I don't understand the term stories. I don't understand it either. Okay, let me try and explain. All right. So you have a car, Ferrari, right? And you want to build a Ferrari. Build a Ferrari is, I don't know, 140 points. Is this a story or an epic? It's an epic, right? What will be the stories for building a Ferrari? I don't know. Maybe get seats, right? Like 8, I don't know, 8 points. Install engine, 13 points. Get gas, 1 point. Engine, right? Brakes. So you guys get it, right? Does it make sense now? So this is your small stories, and this is your epic, but your epic includes all those stories. Where do you got number 104? I just came up with it. Don't, it's just some large number. Don't, it's not even in the Fibonacci sequence. Have to be 144. But that's not the point, okay? The higher the number, the harder the task. Exactly. Yes. All right. So let's go back to our slides. All right. So here is the Scrum kind of view of the perfect world, how it can look. But normally, again, everything kind of differs from company to company. They'll have their own kind of deviations. It's like a general material for you to understand the difference between Scrum, Agile, and Waterfall. The most important standing out part of a Scrum is daily Scrums. So every morning for 15 minutes, the whole team, the Scrum team, normally up to 9 people, developers, designers, QA engineers, they talk for 15 minutes in the morning on tasks that they worked on yesterday and tasks they're going to work on today. Those meetings are facilitated by Scrum Master, and that's one thing, right? And you have sprint planning at the beginning of the sprint, and then sprint retrospective at the end of the sprint, like sprint summary can have different names. And scrums are normally, sprints and scrum normally about 2 weeks long. Okay. Any, how epic will be spread in sprint board. It's not gonna be, you will not see epic in the sprint board. You will only see the stories. But if you click, and I don't know if we have like any epics here, probably not, but let me see. It's not even a story. So this is task. So you can change it to a story. That's a task. Tasks are like smaller parts of work done by developer. But if you create it as an epic, normally you don't pull epics into the sprint. Epics are just there. It's like a project. It's there. You just take stories out of it until all the stories are done and the epic is completed. When all the stories are being finished, the epic is also gone, right? But yeah, it's just like that. You know, there's epic, then there's the stories. You can have also within the stories you can have tasks or subtasks, and there are bugs. Bugs are something that obviously we as Q engineers open when something doesn't work as it should, as it described in the document or in the story. Definitely, there has to be some requirements that the feature being worked on has to follow. If it doesn't, you open the bug. All right. So I think this mostly concludes the first part of the lesson in terms of waterfall, agile, and scrum approaches. Any questions? Let's talk a little bit about what we've just learned. Is anything not clear? So I can try and explain again. Difference between task, subtask, and story. So story is a complete feature that has to be done by the end of the sprint. Task is something that suddenly came up maybe in the middle of the sprint and has to be worked on right now. So instead of, there's no story to pull from the backlog, but a developer or a product owner can create a task and we'll say, hey, we need to reinstall Windows because I don't know, this version of Windows is outdated. I just made this up, but it doesn't have to do with anything within the sprint, but it has to be completed. Otherwise, work is not going. So it can be assigned as a task right away, some tasks to work on, right? Subtasks is something normally that developers use, and they add subtasks within the story. So if developer has a story that says Instagram has to have 10 new filters, that's the story, and then there's a filter names. He can create subtasks for that story. Well, work on filter 1. That's going to be his subtask 1. Once he's done with filter 1, he'll mark his. That's for normally that's just for developers to use themselves. Well, subtask 1 is completed, and then now he has another subtask to work on filter 2. When he's done that, he marks it as completed. So it kind of helps track the progress of completion of the story. I felt like it was very clear. I noticed Kanban though. Is that another approach? Yes, Kanban is another approach, and I'll show you it really quickly. I use Kanban for QA. Kanban can follow along Scrum. So the whole team can be working in Scrum and within the sprints, but you can track your bugs in Kanban. So Kanban, there's no necessity to close all the bugs by the end of the sprint. They're all in the backlog, but they're on your Kanban board. They are prioritized and they work as a priority. So you can drag a Kanban bug to be selected for the development, becomes part of the sprint. It can be in progress. It doesn't have to be fixed this sprint. And once it's done, you mark it as done, bug is fixed. So the good thing about this approach, there's no time frame. Obviously, everything is prioritized by the most critical issue that needs to be worked on first, but you're not bounded by sprint. You can have multiple bugs open, you can all see them, and you just drag them along as they've been fixed and you verify them. Doesn't affect the sprint scope, and by sprint scope, I mean the complexity of the sprint. It doesn't add more time unless it's becoming part of the sprint. It's a good way to track progress. So Kanban board is like moving apples from bucket A to bucket B by the priority, not within the sprint. I don't know if you get the reference. If not, I can give you a better one. But do a little research. Kanban is another approach, and it is used as well. We'll have somewhat talk more about it while we're doing like our bugs and stuff. Can you please explain again difference between stories, epics, and bugs? Okay. So let's go back to our notepad. Let's go again with so there's our project, right? And the project is Boeing factory. I'm going into some Unreal examples, but fairly easy to understand. Or you can think about it as Instagram app. But that's your goal. That's the big thing. Within the project, in order for it to be successful, you'll have to build some planes, right? Boeing 1, Boeing 2, and Boeing 3. I don't know. Because it's really hard to build a plane, it takes a lot of time. This is not an easy task to complete. So those Boeings are going to be epics. That has a lot of work in it. Okay. Epic, 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 epic. Now, when you start building your first Boeing, it will have some stories. So I don't know, give me some examples here. What can be a story for building a Boeing? Again, engine. It's going to be a story, right? Passenger seats, story, wings, story. Okay. Those stories within itself, they can have like some SAP tasks that developer says, well, get some metal for the wing is a subtask, right? All right. Is that clear? Answering your question, and then I'll give a better example with the bugs within this example right now. But was this clear? Okay, awesome. Now, is that a task or a subtask? Get more metal. I think it's a subtask because it's within the wing story, but it could be also a separate task not related to any of the stories. If you all of a sudden like out of metal. All right, so now you start testing your Boeing as a QA engineer, and you say, well, Mr. Developer, there is a hole in the engine. What is this now? It's a bug. It's a bug. Gotta fix that. And that's the difference. Here's your difference. There's epics, there's stories, and there are bugs. There was in the stories. Normally there's subtasks. Something not planned for the sprint could be an additional task. Awesome. I like that everyone is clear. Let's go back to the questions. Is Scrum is an acronym? What does it stands for? Scrum stands for Scrum. I don't think it's an acronym actually. Well, let's do a little research. Scrum is a framework for agile software development, and as a result, understand that it is not an acronym. The term Scrum was first used by, I'm afraid to misread the name, in the 1986 paper, the new product development game. So Scrum is not an acronym, okay? It's just Scrum. Scrum stands for Scrum. But I think some people do give it some meaning to each letter, which doesn't really matter. We don't have any knowledge about any tools or IT, not yet, but you will soon. How many points story has? So story can have from 1 and up to be on the safe side, 13. But normally from 1 to 8 within the Fibonacci sequence. So 1, 2, 3, and then what, like 5? I'm not even sure. Let me double check the Fibonacci sequence there. So 1, 2, 3, 5, 8, 13. Okay, so that's the story for you. Story can have either 1, either 2, either 3, either 5, either 8, or 13 points. We as black box testers deal with story or only involved in bugs. Okay, so stories are for developers. You will be involved with the stories in terms of testing them, making sure that they are implemented as they supposed to be. So they work as they should be working. if your story says when you open manager's account, the background of his page have to be blue, and you open it, it's yellow, you were verifying the story. Story doesn't match the criteria for that story. You open a bug. So is Scrum an approach to, or is it a framework? So Scrum is a framework for agile software development. So Scrum both is an approach and a framework. Okay. Please, could you provide a link for interview questions regarding the subject? We will have a class on interview questions. If you're curious, you can just Google difference between Waterfall and Agile and interview questions and read about it a little bit. As a QA, do we have to create stories or just assigned to us? No, as a QA, we don't create stories. We only open bugs. Stories are created by product owner, and they are assigned to developers. We just taken part in the process in terms of verifying the stories are completed and they're functioning as they're supposed to. In Scrum approach, if the time box is 1 week, that's rarely possible, normally 2 weeks, but is 1 week. At what point of time does a tester has to jump in after functionality is developed? So tester kind of goes along with the sprint, and as soon as something is done, he verifies the story. So there's developer's environment where developer programs in. Once he finished something, it gets pushed into, there's a build, gets pushed to the tester's environment, where the tester verifies the completion of it. Okay. So almost just before the end of the sprint, no, not just before, along was the development. As soon as the development for something is completed, testers start testing it. Does that mean he doesn't have work till then? That's a good question, but there's always work. I mean, there's definitely more work at the end of the sprint for the tester to verify everything, but stories are getting completed within the sprint. Again, developer can have 3 or 4 stories in a sprint. There are going to be a bunch of developers, so you will be testing things along the way as they're being completed. And you also will be verifying bugs being fixed. You will be working on writing test cases for a few future features. So I mean, there's always something to do. When should I not choose Scrum? I mean, it's not really up to you. This approach is chosen by the whole team when the company is established. It's not like, hey, we're doing Scrum or we're doing Agile, let's switch. No, it's the company's policy, right? So it is what it is. Is the type of software-driven lifecycle decided by the planning team, or we as a tester have to decide the approach? So the type of, well, software development lifecycle is software-driven lifecycle. You're deciding type of approach to a development, and this is decided by the director, the main architect. So those people that talk directly to the CEO of the company, that say, hey, we can use this approach or this approach. So it's not really decided by developers or testers, not even by the product owners. I would say decided by the director of development. Backlog and story are the same. No, backlog is like a story is a book. Backlog is a shelf where you keep all the books that you're not reading. Whatever is you're reading, you put it on the table, and that's your sprint. Okay. Would a tester have to rush at the last moment under pressure to finish within the stipulated time of the sprint? In other words, is Agile more stressful compared to Waterfall? I definitely can say that Agile is more stressful than Waterfall, but there is a little spike in testing at the end of the sprint. Definitely, that's a normal thing. But the testing moves along with all the stories being completed within the sprint. So it's not all the work is done at the last moment. It's done within the sprint, during the sprint. Why isn't this broken down on the slides? I mean, it is broken down on the slides. I'm just giving you, I don't know, easy examples, like something that you understand. But in terms of Agile, the board that we saw in JIRA and all that stuff that I was moving around, it's going to be also part of other classes. I'm just kind of preparing you for that. Okay. So as a QA, we don't create stories. They're not assigned to us. Stories are assigned to developers. We just test them. What is the difference between approach and the framework? Not sure what this question means. I don't know. There's framework and approach can be used as synonymous. Final sign off at the end of the sprint is done by product owner. Yes, product owner together with QA and developers. Everything move along as a team. So team okays the final the release at the end of the sprint or the build. PO is a product owner, from what I understand. In the question context, Scrum is framework for Agile. What do we have to do with Scrum? Do we have to test it? Scrum is the approach that you work with. It's like your daily schedule, right? So you don't test Scrum, but you work in a certain regime or in a certain schedule and a certain approach. Who is owner of the product? Owner of the product is the person in the team that's responsible for making sure that product development is moving along, talking to developers, and talking with the clients, let's say, or whoever on the other end receiving the product. What was he talking about at the beginning about Google Drive? There's a link with all the materials on the Google Drive. I think I'm only having hard time following because I don't have access to JIRA yet. If I don't get it now, I hopefully understand hands-on later. Definitely you will. Don't worry about it. What to expect on the first day of work as a tester with respect to Scrum board? Don't expect nothing at all. I mean, any company, IT company you start working in, it takes about months or two to understand the product. You'll be trained on the work in terms of how to test things and what the test plan is. And so don't worry about it. Don't stress out. On the first day, there's nothing you need to do except maybe just make sure you have your email configured and you can access the internet and have an account, stuff like that. Looks like Agile is an approach and Agile Scrum is an approach and framework. What is the difference? Okay, Agile is an approach and framework. You can be working in Agile, which will be 2 months long sprints. It's more relaxed than Scrum. It's not as fast, but still kind of flexible. And then you can work in Agile Scrum, which is the same as Scrum, the same thing, just kind of 2 different names, which is also an approach and framework of software development. Could there be a hybrid mix of Waterfall and Agile? If yes, how does that work as regards testing? Very good question. So we're talking about the ideal world understanding of Agile, Scrum, and Waterfall right now. But normally, what you will find when you start working for a company, they have a mix of kind of everything. They some companies say that they work in Scrum, but they focus on writing documentation first. Others say that they do Agile, but their sprint like is a half a year long thing. I mean, there's so many different um, variations of combinations of things out there. So it's just important for you to understand the difference, like in the ideal world, so you can answer when you've been asked about it. But how it's really going to happen, you will get hired to a company and you will just follow the approach, whatever they follow. And they might be calling it Agile or Scrum, but again, they're working in something completely different that they kind of came up as a team while they were moving the project along. So it's a normal thing. Um, it's just what it is. It is what it is. Scrum is Agile's baby. Yes, you can say that. um, just to be clear, Agile, Waterfall, and Scrum are all approaches used by companies, but it depends on what the project is and how it fits their needs. Exactly. Robert, you're just perfectly nailed it. Very good question slash explanation. Difference between Scrum and Agile is having Scrum's meetings and having certain timeframes. I would say so. Yes, Scrum also has a Scrum Master as a real position on the team, and Scrum teams are smaller than Agile teams, and Scrum teams normally have like uh, a team of a Scrum team will have a developer, a QA, whatever resources are needed to make sure the feature is completed. And Agile, you can have different teams. Like you can have a separate QA team, you can have like a separate dev team. Um, but those are all details that are so different in each companies. You just when you'll get hired, you'll just learn how the company works, and that's it. That's how it is. Do I get to understand after course finished? It's very hard to understand right now. I think we will be talking about it a lot more within the course. So I think you will be learning more and more maybe when you practice. Also, if you don't understand something as of right now, I recommend uh, rewatching the video. And if you still did not understand, I recommend Googling, trying to Google and read to understand more. I mean, that's normal practice, and learning is really just the process of repetition and being present while you consuming the material. When you're reading, just make sure you think about what you read, and you should be good. All right. I think that was pretty awesome. Let's talk about testing web applications based on the specification and reporting bugs to JIRA. So we're kind of in the second part of our lesson right now. Um, oh, just a quick reference here. If we're talking about testing products, I just want, especially testing web pages, I just want you to understand. For you as black box tester, starting your career as a tester, you will be normally testing front end. So the front end is the thing that the customer sees, right? And a very basic example, if we go into google.com, all this that you see is the front end, right? Uh, there's some authentication, user profile, notification. There's some API in between, let's say that. So API is like pieces of code that talk, or set of functions that communicate between front end and back end. As soon as I type in here something, what is quality assurance? Quality assurance. As soon as I did that and hit enter, I send a request to the server, which is the backend that, based on some logic, returns the results it finds on the internet in regards of my request. So I interact with the front end, but by interacting with the front end, I send requests to the back end that processes data and returns something back to the front end. So this is how the web kind of works. There's a customer-facing part, and there is something that always happens behind the scenes, which is back end. And I don't know if you ever saw memes, back end versus front end, but now you will get what they mean. I don't know if we can see something. Yeah, this is good. So you can see that front end is all cute and nice and customers love it. And then there's a back end and it's ugly and disturbing because normally, because people don't see the code in the back end or how it's done, there could be a combination of like different parts, or there's so many hacks to make sure it works, but it just could be just terrible. That's a funny meme though. But yeah, front end is something users see and everything nice and clean. But if you go on the back end, it's like a mash of different codes. Different developers worked on it in different times. There's some kind of errors that's repressed on the back end that they don't go on the front end, but sometimes when it's crashing. So could be a lot of things happening in the back end. And that's why normally there's a meme like that that shows back end is pretty ugly and front end is beautiful. GUI is a front end, yes. Graphical user interface is a part of the front end. Okay, so just something for you to understand before we start like going into web testing and stuff. All right. And same thing with applications also. You have application, whatever you see on your phone, your touch is like the front end, but when the request goes, uses some sort of like API and talks to the back end. Okay. All right, let's see other slides here. Okay, testing web application based on specification. So here's an example of some specification. It's a product requirement document. You can take a look at it, but that's pretty much like a document that is, let's say we have a waterfall approach and we develop a document and it actually says what should be doing. It's not even completed. What each part should be doing. Okay. Add in two-factor authentication. That's like a story there. Okay, let's grab this banking project. So there is a spec or business requirement document or like a software requirement specification document, but it is pretty much describes in words what a certain feature should be. And based on the specification, stories are created. So if we take a look at, let's say, specific requirement, bank that will have two roles, manager and a customer role. And then it says, well, the manager role has all these features and accesses, and the customer has all these features and accesses, and we follow along the document. Let's see, okay, there's a development of the module that says balance inquiry. Who is this usable by? Both by manager and customer. And then description. Customer can have multiple bank accounts. He can view balance of his accounts only. That's the criteria, acceptance criteria. Then there's a manager role, and manager can view balance accounts of all the customers who come under his supervision. That's another acceptance criteria. So when the story going to be implemented, you will be testing it both as a customer and a manager and making sure that it follows the description and the requirements. Normally, all this stuff gets ported into the story, and the story should say and describe what feature should be doing. This document is something that a product owner or business analyst can build, and it can be followed along in the process of development. Stories will be based and created based on this document, um, put in the backlog, and eventually pulled into the sprint. Is that clear? All right, awesome. So think about it as like a guide of everything that should be within the project and what it should do, what it should not do. You can read through this document if you want, and then there's a more precise example here within the screenshot. I think this is taken from a real project. So adding two-factor authentication, that means on your phone, for example, you not only sign in with a password, but you also receive like a code that you need to put in, or maybe you have like a application that you have to go into and read the code and put it in if it's not texted to you. So that's like a very thorough description. And this is not a story yet. It's part of the requirement document. And the business documents are normally worked on by a business analyst. Based on them are stories created, and product owners create tasks for developers. But role of a business analyst to make sure that something that is being asked by clients or investors is actually following best business practices. So, if there are certain regulations that we should be following, they're there. So this is like a document, go-to document, right, for a developing feature. Can you go slide by slide, please? I'm confused. What do you mean? There's no slide right now. I'm just describing you the process of documentation and what can be in the documentation when a team is working on a project. Based on PRD or BRD, we create test cases. It's possible, but I would say a safer approach in the Scrum, creating test cases based on, well, the stories. So stories are created based on the BRD and PRD, and you can go, when you verify the story, you can go in the stories requirements. If there are no requirements within the story, then you go and make sure that it's following the documentation. Do tester get PRD? Everybody in the team has access to the business documentation. So developers, product owners, business analysts. So this is, and you can see there's an epic, okay? Add in two-factor authentication using Google Authenticator. And the epic is in progress. This is part of the document. There's some owner, there's designers, there are developers involved, there's a QA, and there's some goals that describe. So offer our clients and users the option to add an additional layer of security when accessing their accounts through some portals or websites. And then ensuring the integrity of client server connection. All this stuff normally is written like by a business analyst with the help of a product owner. There's some background, meaning it describes why do we want that. And then it says, well, because a lot of companies use it and it's very secure. Some assumptions, user types, who will be using this feature, some use cases. So, I mean, it's just like a map that describes everything this feature should be doing, why is it needed, and like it's just normal, boring document, I would say. Okay. Um, your goal as a tester here really to make sure there's some criteria like acceptance criteria, there's some release criteria here that functionality, once the story that is based on this documentation is completed, that it is following it and it's doing what it's supposed to. If the requirement says user should receive authentication code that is 5 digits long and randomly generated every time when users tries to log in, if you all of a sudden receive 3 digits or 10 digits and it's the same code all the time, well, it's already failing the criteria. Okay, so you test the completed stories against the criteria, making sure that they're following them. We should be happy if we have this docs. Yeah, I'll be honest with you, a lot of companies don't have the docs. A lot of startups just follow stories and there's no really thorough documentation. So again, having a thorough documentation more about waterfall approach than agile. In agile, you can have some documentation, but maybe not as thorough. And when there's a story, you might actually go and talk to product owners saying, hey, what are the acceptance criteria? Like, we need some more information here. So that's normal practice. Okay, so is this clear? Criteria is positive testing. Yes, that's true. It is making sure that a product or a feature is doing what it is supposed to do. There's also negative testing, making sure if you break the software, it still have some safe check mechanisms, right? It's not breaking it. Yes, basically we get document to read it and understand before we start working. Yeah, pretty much. Okay. All right. Let's do some web application test. There is something we will be using to creating test cases, and let me think. Which one should I use? Yeah, maybe this should work. Okay. So you have let's think. There's you're working at the museum as a QA engineer. Museum has its own web page portal, and they have a new exhibition soon, in a month or so, and the new page is being built for that. It's all about space and lunar exploration. Okay, that's I'm telling you, that could be a real life thing. It could be the real life scenario. Let's take a look at this page, and I'm gonna send the link to everybody so you can kind of dive into it. So one of the criteria for this, and this all is written in the document, so there has to be space, the final frontier, clickable element that goes to the space page, lunar, the exploration of the moon element on the page that has to be clickable and has to redirect to lunar exploration page. If you start looking at this page right now, can you see anything that is broken in your opinion? Like, do we need to file a bug here? And I mean, there's like a lot of things, but even without document for acceptance criteria, I just gave you some acceptance criteria verbally, right? But what are you doing, guys, right now? You're doing an exploration testing. You're trying to test a web page without test plan, but pretending as if you have one based on your pretty much like QA experience. And I gave you some acceptance criteria. So you guys already coming up with pretty great answers here. So image alignment, right? They're not aligned. It's pretty poor. Bad design, yes. I mean, if there's certain design, some of the stories will have a mock-up or wireframes, and I'll show you what a wireframe is. There's also, you can also read about wireframes versus mock-up. But when there is no web page yet, there's definitely a document and the requirements for a web page, but there's also a wireframe that can be part of the story, like a picture in the story saying, hey, this is how the web page should look. And that's pretty much what a wireframe is. So you will have an image of your web page in the story that will look like that, somewhat like that. Come on, just open it. Those are small. Need a bigger image. Just a second. Large. All right. As you can see, also this is being used by web developers, so it's not like something only done for developers or something. Can I just open this image, please? Oh, here it is. All right. Let me zoom in. I know it doesn't look too good, but the wireframe, what it is, right? You'll have some sort of a guidance, and the developer will have some sort of a guidance where before anything is even ready, how a web page should look. Oh, here we go. So there should be a logo. There should be some clickable elements that users can go to. This is called lorem ipsum, which is like a made-up text. It's just a filler pretty much until there's really a real text written. So you look into the story and it will have some sort of a wireframe. Normally, if you're working in a web development company that does web development, some sort of a web page. So once it's ready, you can take a look at this wireframe and then go and take a look at the web page, and you'll be like, what the hell? There's supposed to be a logo here, right? Where's the logo? There's supposed to be all those elements, clickable elements here. Where are they? Okay. In our case, I didn't give you any wireframe except just some minor criteria of acceptance, meaning all of those have to be clickable. But let's take a look. I can click this. You can see this little hand. It's kind of clickable. But it's not even going anywhere. So okay, that's a bug. I know that it should take me to the Space the Final Frontier page with more museum pictures. It doesn't do that. But also moving along into this side, I don't even have a hand anymore. So this is not even clickable. And all I have here, there's no clickable element, just pure text. That's even worse. Okay, there's another bug. What is the Latin word that used to describe the body of the text in the wireframe? Lorem ipsum, I think. Lorem ipsum. That's the name of this made-up text. Okay. If anybody in the chat ever worked in web development, they probably know all those things. But in testers world, you know a little bit about everything. You definitely you're not coding anything, but you do understand how things should work, right? Someone also found there's NASA link has 404 arrow. So 404 means that the page is missing. And I'll give you this link for HTTP error codes. So you can read what different codes mean. So if you open a page and it says 404, you will know that there's pretty much client error. Everything that starts with 4 is a client error. And if it's 404, oh, no, it means it's not found, so it's missing. Okay. Okay, so we did our exploration testing. Let's vote in the chat what kind of a bug you guys want to open up. So as an example, we'll open up one bug on this page. We did some testing. I mean, not a lot, but there was some acceptance criteria. It's not actually Latin, doesn't mean anything. Yeah, true. All right, page is not clickable. So yeah, let's do this Luna exploration then, right? Is the wireframe like a blueprint? Yes, you can say that. Should the color and size of the letters be displayed in the document requirement? It may not be displayed in the document requirement, but you can ask the product owner to put it as part of the description in the story. Okay? All right. All right. So let's go with this Luna, the exploration of the moon. So we'll open JIRA, and right now you probably don't have access to JIRA, which is fine. You'll get it eventually. If you do, that's great. I'm trying just to see if you have like some specific access at some point. Probably when you'll be doing the homework, but each class has its own specifics, so you might have an earlier access with the JIRA. Are wireframes used in JIRA or in some other tools? Wireframes are just screenshots or pictures of how the web page should look once it's done. Wireframes can be used in the business document. Wireframes can be used within the story in JIRA. JIRA stories are opened and tracked in JIRA. So, I mean, where do you use pencil? Do you use pencil to write on paper, or do you use pencil to write on a wall? I mean, it's pencil, and you can use it anywhere where it's applicable, right? So, is it possible to download JIRA for free? I think there's a trial account, but we will give you access to JIRA. Do you mean I can advise product owner about the design? You can definitely talk with the product owner about design if you're a tester and you see design is pretty bad. You can tell them about it. You can say, hey, this is not aligned. I think we should have images at least of the same size and text aligned so it doesn't look as ugly. I mean, you can't really insist. It's not a blocker. It's more about what the client wants, but you can always suggest, yes. You are also with explanations. Thank you. When we present it with a new project, how will we know the expected results to test for? So it will be described in the requirements document, or there will be a story for a developer that will describe everything the feature should do. And when you test the completed story, you just read through the requirements within the story. If it doesn't do something that it's supposed to, well, it's a bug. When we will start getting homework? I think on August 28th, so in a couple weeks or in a week. week plus a day. Okay. Yeah, checks. You can check summary. All right, let's go to JIRA. I'm just gonna pick some random project, not necessarily our project, just as an example, so you guys can see. But then, I mean, you'll definitely have a lot more hands-on. Boom, boom, boom. All right, let's grab any project we have here. Doesn't really matter. For practice. Okay. So I'm gonna go in the Kanban board. That's where I open my bugs and track them. And then I will hit where is the plus? Sorry, it's not responding. Okay. All right, issues. No. Okay, so this is a filter. So go back. So we're in a Kanban board. There's also a bunch of bug already that we have filed here, but we're just gonna hit click create. So issue type is a bug. We know that it is a bug, and we agreed on page is not clickable. Okay. So let's grab Horgwith as a little tag here as the name of the project that we know what it's related to. And we agreed that we can't click Luna, the exploration of the moon. So let's grab this. I'm gonna put it in brackets. Does not, well, is not clickable, is not clickable. Does not redirect. Okay, for those of you who are like me, really bad at English, clickable, and not originally from the States, I use Grammarly. And I recommend you installing it as an extension. I'll send the link. There's a free version that I'm using, and I think it's perfectly good for anybody. You don't need more than that. It will highlight things for you if there are, any grammar mistakes. So just use that. All right. So read the title. Is that clear from the title what's going on in the bug? So it says Hogwarts as a project website. Then you have in the brackets Luna, the exploration of the moon, kind of highlighting the element here. And then it says not clickable, does not redirect. Okay. Great. So then we can grab the first sentence as the beginning of the description. And then let's say if we need to add more information, you can say as per story, or let's say requirements. Luna, the exploration of the moon. Should open new page, and then you can provide, let's say, link if there's a link in the story. I don't know, instead of public, I'm just gonna have a made up link. It's not real, but just to have it there. Should open new page, and you have the link here with lunar exhibition details. It doesn't know what the word I was trying to type. Exhibition. Give me a better suggestion, Google. That was. I think it was fine. All right. All right. So that's the first part. You can add more to a description if if the title is not descriptive enough. You don't want to have a long title. Absolutely not. Okay. Any questions about that? What we're doing right now? Yeah. Okay. So once we're done with the description, and you don't need to write the description as I do, but that's what I normally do. And every QA engineer has its own best practice. And when you start working at the company, they'll have their own way, so you will be following what they do. Then you do the steps to reproduce. And step 1, go to, let's say, this page. And it's fairly easy here. Step 2, click on element or text element, right? So that's your steps to reproduce. Fairly easy. And you're doing it for a developer trying to reproduce. So you're doing it for other QA engineers. Then you put the expected and actual result. Expected result, you say a user is redirected to this made up page. And then you say actual result, actual results, element is not clickable. Whatever. Should work. Okay. Severity normally or priority you leave it as medium. Labels, we don't use it. For the environment, we do say Windows. You list your environment, Windows 10 minus 64 bit version. No specific Windows version, like in terms of the build. For Chrome, you can take a look into help about Google Chrome. Here's your build. Say Chrome, grab the build version. In some cases, if it's like a visual bug, you might also need to point to screen resolution, or like if it's a mobile device portrait versus landscape orientation plus app version plus your iOS version. But let's say we have, what is it, 1080? So it's 920 by 1080, and normally you just put 1080p. Then you need to attach a screenshot. For a screenshot, I use a program called Just a second. Oh, let me open the page. So for screenshot, I use program called Lightshot, and I'm gonna send you the link right now. It's also free. You can use that. Okay. So I do the screenshot, the whole thing. Don't grab any tabs at top if you have something, that shouldn't be there opened. And then you just highlight the problem area like this. Don't use paint. Don't make ugly doodle highlights. This is nice and red and visible. If needed, you can also like grab and use an arrow here. It's not necessary in this case. Then you just hit Control C, go to the body of the issue, press Control V, just gonna attach the image right there. There are different ways you can download it on your computer. You can then attach it to the bug, or you can copy and paste it like I just did. And then you hit create. All right, and then let's open our bug. Let's open it in a new page. In the new page. Here we are. Perfect title, description, steps to reproduce, expected versus actual results, and the screenshot of what's actually happening. Comments, if bug is being fixed or assigned, you assign it normally to a manager, so then he assigns it to developer. If it is related to a story, you can link the issue and then tell like it blocks, and then all the red are bugs. So let's find like a story. I know we don't have a story. 132. Let's copy and change 132 to a story, and let's assume it's blocking 132. There's nothing related to this in 132, but we're just gonna do it for the sake of no. Where is it? Huh. I thought there was 132. ML. All right, ML 132. So we're gonna change ML 132 to a story, just for the sake of the presentation here, and we will tell that our bug, which is auto assign a number VCI 86 by JIRA, is actually blocking 132 story. And let's say story 132 was, well, 123, whatever, was about that page. Okay, that's it. We have a bug. I'm gonna share a link with everybody. Not sure if you guys can see right now if you don't have JIRA, but for the future reference. Okay, 2 minutes until the end of the class. Questions? Feedback? Have fashion companies hire QA. So guys, anything that has a website, a software, your bracelet that you're wearing, your coffee machine has timer on it, obviously your phone apps, company that sells shoes, or anything that has software has QA engineers. Oh, almost any company that has to do anything with coding in any sense or sort has QA. QA field is vast. Number of products is huge, and they all are different. So possibilities are endless. Does each company have their own screenshot software they use? They have some tools that they used to, yes. Companies that have some sort of policies probably develop their own tools. Other companies use tools that are available on the market. I know Apple and Google probably build their own stuff for the security's sake, but your neighborhood t-shirt store probably use whatever you want to use. Will the bug report creating be taught again? Yes, I believe so. You can also rewatch this class when you'll get the homework. Make sure you do rewatch this class. Okay, going through your questions. How did you attach the link? Expected result if it's not clickable. I just made up the link. It's the link was made up. It's not a real link, but you might have it in the documentation or part of the story. Do we always assign to a manager? Yes, normally you assign to a manager and then the manager assigns to a developer. If not to a manager, to a product owner. Yes, in terms of bugs reporting. Are remote manual QA positions common, or do companies prefer that employees work from the office? Well, because of the COVID, everybody works from home. So right now, working remotely is fairly common. Very clear and informative. Thank you. Well, thank you. I'm glad you enjoyed it. If I use Lightshot, what type of file it creates? I think a JPEG or PNG. You can either store it in cloud and provide a link when you do a screenshot, or save it to your machine and attach it, or just copy and paste it directly into the JIRA bug. I had friends in the industry, they tell me they had to work as contractors before they could find a full-time position. How likely do you think that it's for most people? Yeah, I mean, it's fine. It doesn't really matter, contract or full-time. I worked both positions. Contract position, less benefits, but more money on hands. Full-time position, they take a lot of your paycheck out of your taxes right away. So, I mean, whatever you like. Both are fairly common on the market. Okay, guys, so we out of time. Again, thank you very much. I'm glad that you enjoyed the lesson, and I'll see you sometime soon. We'll be talking about SQL. Bye-bye.